The clock on Emma's bedroom wall read 9:47 p.m. when she heard her parents' voices escalating downstairs. It wasn't the first time this week, not even the first time today. She pulled her comforter over her head, a futile attempt to muffle the sounds of her mother's shrill accusations and her father's angry rebuttals. At 9 years old, Emma had become an expert at recognizing the various stages of her parents' fights. This one had the markings of a particularly brutal battle. "You never wanted to be a father," her mother, Jennifer, screamed. "All you care about is your new life with your girlfriend, while I'm stuck here dealing with Emma's emotional problems." "Emotional problems," her father, David, shot back, his voice dripping with venom. "She has emotional problems because you've turned her into a pawn in your pathetic game. You're the one poisoning her mind against me." Emma squeezed her eyes shut, trying to disappear into the mattress. This was always how it went. They accused each other of being terrible parents, of not caring enough, of only thinking about themselves. And Emma sat in the middle, absorbing every cruel word, every accusation, every promise that the other parent was the villain. She felt her stomach tighten into a knot so painful she almost cried out. The custody battle had officially begun 6 months ago, but in truth, it had started the moment her parents announced their divorce 3 years earlier. What had once been quiet tension and cold silences had transformed into an all-out war with Emma as the contested prize. Her mother had hired an aggressive lawyer named Richard, a man with cold eyes and a colder heart who seemed to view Emma's testimony as a tool to be sharpened and wielded. Her father had countered with his own attorney, a woman named Susan Williams, who was equally ruthless, equally focused on winning at any cost. Every other weekend when Emma visited her father's apartment, Jennifer would quiz her about what he was doing, who he was seeing, whether he was spending money on his girlfriend instead of child support. "Your father doesn't really want to spend time with you," Jennifer would whisper, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "He just wants to avoid paying me more money. You deserve better than that, sweetheart." Then, when Emma spent the week with her mother, David's apartment would become the interrogation chamber. "Your mother has always been selfish," he'd say, pouring poison into Emma's ears. "She doesn't want me to see you because she's jealous of my happiness. I love you more than she ever will." He'd make promises he couldn't keep, trips to Disneyland, expensive video games, whatever it took to make Emma feel like he was the better parent, the one who really loved her. Emma had learned to nod and smile and say what each parent wanted to hear. It was survival. It was easier than trying to explain that she loved them both, that neither was entirely good or entirely bad, that the real villain was this endless, consuming battle that was eating her alive from the inside out. But tonight, as the screaming continued downstairs, Emma couldn't take it anymore. She slipped out of bed and walked to her bedroom door, cracking it open just enough to hear her parents' words more clearly. They were in the kitchen now. She could visualize them, her mother with her arms crossed defensively, her father packing like a caged animal, both of them red-faced and trembling with rage. "The judge will side with me," Jennifer hissed. "Emma will tell the court the truth about what kind of father you really are." "You mean the lie you've been coaching her to tell?" David's voice was cold, calculated. "Because that's what this is, isn't it? You've spent 3 years brainwashing our daughter to hate me." "I haven't done anything except protect her from your negligence." "Negligence? I see her every other weekend. I pay child support. What more do you want from me?" Emma felt tears streaming down her face. She sank to the floor in the hallway, hugging her knees to her chest. The words swirled around her like a tornado. Lies, accusations, distortions of truth wrapped up in legitimate grievances. Her father had missed her soccer game last month, but it was because his car broke down and he called to explain. Her mother did sometimes question her about her time with her father, but was that really brainwashing, or was she just a concerned parent? Emma didn't know anymore. She couldn't distinguish between truth and manipulation. She was drowning. That's when she heard the soft padding of paws on the hardwood floor. Bailey, their golden retriever, had sensed Emma's distress. The 3-year-old dog, technically Emma's dog, a gift from her father 2 years ago that her mother had surprisingly allowed her to keep, came and lay down right next to Emma in the hallway. Bailey pressed her warm, solid body against Emma's side, and the girl buried her face in the dog's soft fur. "I don't know what to do," Emma whispered to Bailey, her voice barely audible. "I don't know what to tell the judge. I don't know which parent to say I want to live with. I love them both, but I hate both of them right now." Bailey didn't respond with words. She couldn't. But she did something almost more powerful. She gently turned her head and licked Emma's tear-soaked cheek, then rested her chin on the girl's shoulder, staying perfectly still and present. There was no judgment in Bailey's brown eyes, no agenda, no desire to manipulate or control. There was only unconditional love, complete acceptance, and the kind of presence that said, "I'm here with you in this pain, and that matters." For the first time in months, Emma felt a tiny crack in her despair. She realized that Bailey understood something her parents had forgotten, that Emma mattered more than the battle, that Emma's was worth more than winning. Downstairs, the fight continued, but Emma wasn't listening anymore. She was lost in the simple comfort of her dog's presence, in the pure, uncomplicated love that asked nothing from her except to exist. She held Bailey closer and made a silent promise to herself. Somehow, someway, she would find her voice in this courtroom. And she would tell the truth, not her mother's version of the truth, not her father's version, but her own truth. The hearing was exactly 13 days away. 13 days to figure out how to make the adults around her understand what she was experiencing. 13 days to find the courage to speak up for herself in a room full of lawyers and judges who had already made up their minds about her family's future. Emma didn't know it yet, but Bailey would play a crucial role in that journey. That dog would become the key to unlocking Emma's voice when nothing else could reach her. For now, though, Emma simply sat in the hallway with Bailey, listening to her parents' angry voices fade into the background, finding solace in the only unconditional love she had left in this fractured world. 2 weeks had passed since that terrible night in the hallway. Emma's life had become a carefully choreographed performance. At school, she smiled and pretended everything was fine, earning straight A's and participating in class discussions to maintain the of a well-adjusted child. At her mother's house, she listened to Jennifer's complaints about her father and nodded at just the right moments. At her father's apartment, she played the role of the devoted daughter, laughing at his jokes and pretending she believed his promises that everything would be better soon. But inside, Emma was hollow. She felt like a puppet with invisible strings, controlled by two people who claimed to love her yet used her as ammunition against each other. The anxiety that had started months ago had now evolved into something more insidious, a constant, gnawing dread that lived in her chest, making it hard to eat or sleep. She developed a nervous habit of picking at her cuticles until they bled, and she flinched at loud noises. The court hearing was now only 11 days away, and her mother had recently hired a child coaching specialist, a woman who came to their house to prepare Emma for testimony. In reality, this woman was training Emma on what to say, how to say it, and what emotions to display for maximum impact on the judge. Emma felt sick every time she thought about lying under oath, but she also felt terrified of disappointing her mother. That rainy Tuesday afternoon changed everything. Emma had asked to stay home from soccer practice, claiming she felt sick. In reality, she just needed to escape. Her mother had a late shift at the hospital where she worked as a nurse, so Emma had the house to herself, just her, Bailey, and the small garage that had become her sanctuary. She'd set up an old laptop there, something her father had given her that her mother didn't know about. It was her secret window to the world beyond her fractured family. She was scrolling through YouTube, trying to distract herself, when she came across a documentary about service dogs. Emma had always known that Bailey was incredibly responsive and intuitive, but watching this documentary opened her eyes to possibilities she'd never considered. She watched videos of dogs alerting diabetic owners to dangerous blood sugar levels, dogs detecting seizures before they happened, dogs providing grounding techniques for people with PTSD and anxiety disorders. But then she found something even more interesting, a video about emotional support animals and how they could be trained to respond to specific hand signals and cues. The trainer in the video demonstrated how a dog could learn to recognize different emotional states in a person and respond with specific, trained behaviors. The dog would press against the person during anxiety, place a paw on their chest, tilt their head in a particular way. Deliberate actions that communicated understanding and presence. Emma's heart began to race. An idea was forming, something dangerous and brilliant and terrifying all at once. What if she trained Bailey to respond to signals that represented different emotional states? What if she could create a physical, undeniable way to communicate her truth that wasn't dependent on words? What if, when she was in the courtroom, Bailey could validate her honesty in a way that neither lawyer could manipulate or twist? For the first time in weeks, Emma felt a spark of hope. She spent the rest of the afternoon researching dog training techniques, taking notes in a small notebook she hid beneath a loose floorboard in the garage. She learned about positive reinforcement, about consistency, about the incredible capacity dogs had to learn and respond to human communication. The next morning before school, Emma started experimenting. She chose her first signal, a simple gesture where she'd touch her heart and then extend her hand outward. This signal would mean, "I'm telling the truth." She spent 15 minutes with Bailey in the backyard before the school bus came, making the gesture and immediately rewarding Bailey with treats and praise when the dog paid attention. Bailey, being an intelligent and food-motivated animal, caught on quickly. Over the next week, Emma established a training routine. Every morning before school and every afternoon when she came home, she'd spend 30 minutes working with Bailey. She taught the dog to respond to a specific signal for sadness, a downward hand motion where Emma would droop her shoulders and look down. Bailey learned to rest her head on Emma's lap during this signal. For fear, Emma created a closed fist signal, and Bailey learned to press her body against Emma's side. For anger, she made a sharp, quick gesture, and Bailey learned to stand at attention, placing her paw gently on Emma's arm. But the most important signal was the one for truth. Emma refined this one obsessively. She'd make the gesture, and then she'd speak honest statements. "I love both my parents. I'm scared about the hearing. I don't want to choose between them. I'm tired of lying." Every time she spoke truth to Bailey, she'd make the signal, and the dog would respond with profound attention, sometimes placing a paw on Emma's chest, sometimes resting her head against Emma's heart. It was during one of these training sessions that Emma realized something that made her breath catch. Bailey's responses felt real. When Emma made the truth signal, Bailey's reaction was genuine, not theatrical. The dog could sense something in Emma's energy, whether she was genuinely expressing something truthful or just going through the motions. It was as if Bailey had become Emma's lie detector, her emotional mirror. No adult had taken Emma seriously in months. They were all too busy fighting their own battles, using Emma as a tool, a prize, a weapon. But Bailey understood. Bailey listened. Bailey responded with love and acceptance regardless of what Emma said or felt. Emma began keeping a detailed journal hidden in that same loose floorboard. documenting Bailey's progress, her observations about the dog's ability to sense her emotions, and her hopes about what might happen in the courtroom. She wrote about how she felt more honest when she was with Bailey than she ever felt with either of her parents. She wrote about the terrifying possibility that the judge might not believe her, that Bailey's signals might be dismissed as a trained trick, that this desperate gambit might fail. But she also wrote about something more powerful, the realization that she had agency in this situation. She couldn't control her parents' behavior. She couldn't control the lawyer's strategies or the judge's decisions. But she could control her own truth, and she could find creative ways to express it. 10 days before the hearing, Emma made a decision. She would take Bailey to that courtroom. Somehow, some way, she would convince someone, the judge, the court counselor, someone, to let her try. Because Emma had discovered something in those 2 weeks of secret training that changed her perspective entirely. Bailey wasn't just a dog. Bailey was her voice, her proof that it was possible to communicate love and truth without manipulation or anger. On the evening of her 10th training session with Bailey, Emma sat in the garage with her hand resting on the dog's golden fur, and she whispered a promise. "Bailey, when I need you most, you're going to help people understand who I really am. You're going to help me tell the truth when everything in me wants to hide." Bailey lifted her head and made the signal without being prompted. She placed her paw directly on Emma's heart and looked into her eyes with a depth of understanding that no 9-year-old should have to search for in her parents, but that she had miraculously found in her dog. Emma cried that night, but for the first time in months, they were tears of hope rather than despair. The morning of the hearing, Emma woke at 5:47 a.m. without an alarm. She hadn't slept more than 2 hours. Her stomach was a knot of anxiety so tight she could barely breathe. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling of her mother's house, listening to the rain pattering against the window, thinking about Bailey waiting at home at her father's apartment with the dog sitter. Emma had begged to bring Bailey with her, but both parents had refused. "Absolutely not," her mother had said sharply. "That would look ridiculous in front of a judge." Emma didn't know yet that Bailey's absence would become the catalyst for everything that was about to unfold. She dragged herself out of bed and took a shower, trying to wash away the nightmare that had plagued her sleep. A dream where she was trapped in a dark maze with her parents' voices echoing from every direction, getting louder and angrier, until she couldn't tell which voice was which anymore. Her mother had laid out a cream-colored dress for her to wear, something modest and innocent-looking, designed to appeal to the judge's sympathies. Jennifer herself was dressed in a carefully curated outfit, a business suit that suggested competence and responsibility, minimal makeup to appear trustworthy, her hair pulled back in a neat bun. She looked like she'd been coached by a professional image consultant, which Emma would later discover she had been. "Remember what we talked about," Jennifer said as they drove to the courthouse. It wasn't a suggestion, it was a command. When the judge asks you about your father, you need to tell the truth about how he's neglected you. Remember how he missed your basketball tournament. Remember how he was always too busy with his new girlfriend. Emma stared out the window, not responding. She'd heard this script 100 times over the past few weeks. Her mother had written it out for her, gone over it with the coaching specialist, role-played the courtroom questions until Emma could recite them in her sleep. But now, facing the actual hearing, Emma felt something shifting inside her. The words her mother wanted her to say felt like poison on her tongue. The courthouse was an imposing concrete structure that seemed designed to intimidate. Inside, everything was marble and wood and echoing emptiness. Legal professionals rushed past in dark suits, talking rapidly into phones. The atmosphere felt cold and hostile, completely devoid of the warmth and humanity that Emma desperately needed. In the hallway outside the courtroom, she saw her father for the first time since the legal battle had intensified. He looked thinner, older, worn down by months of litigation and legal fees. His attorney, Susan Williams, was a sharp-faced woman in her 50s who immediately began instructing David on courtroom strategy, barely acknowledging Emma's presence. David approached Emma and hugged her, and she felt him trembling. "Just tell the judge the truth," he whispered. "Tell him how much you love spending time with me, how your mother has been trying to keep us apart." So now Emma had two contradictory scripts, two versions of truth, that she was supposed to deliver. Her head was already spinning. Judge entered the courtroom at 10:00 a.m. sharp. She was a woman in her 60s with steel-gray hair and an expression that suggested she'd seen every trick in the book and had no patience for any of them. She surveyed the room with cold, calculating eyes, the lawyers, the parents, and finally, Emma. When the judge's gaze landed on her, Emma felt something inside her wither. The first several hours were consumed with legal arguments. Emma's mother's attorney, Richard, presented his case with meticulous detail. He painted a picture of David as an absent father, a man who cared more about his new relationship than his daughter. He introduced documents showing missed payments, photographs of his new girlfriend, a calendar supposedly showing David's unreliability. The lawyer's voice was smooth and persuasive, and he made everything sound damning. Then Susan Williams presented her counterargument, showing Emma's father in a completely different light, a dedicated dad fighting against a vindictive ex-wife who was using his daughter as a weapon. She presented his own documents, his own photographs, his own calendar. It was in manipulation, and Emma realized with growing horror that both sides could make their case sound completely convincing. Then came the moment Emma had been dreading. "Your Honor, we'd like to call Emma Mitchell to the stand." Emma's legs felt like they were made of water as she walked to the witness stand. The Bible was placed in front of her, and she was sworn in by the court clerk. She looked out at the courtroom, her parents sitting on opposite sides, their attorneys flanking them like sharks circling prey, the judge watching from her bench with that cold, impenetrable expression. Richard approached her first, his smile designed to appear friendly but feeling predatory to Emma. "Hello, Emma. I'm Mister. I just want to ask you some questions about your father. Is that okay?" Emma nodded mutely. "Now, Emma, you love your mother very much, don't you?" "Yes," Emma whispered. "And you want to live with your mother most of the time, correct? Because your father has been neglecting you." Emma felt her mouth go dry. This wasn't a question, it was a trap disguised as a question. I don't know," she managed. "You don't know?" Mr. raised his eyebrows as if her uncertainty was shocking. "Well, let me refresh your memory. Didn't your father miss your basketball tournament last spring?" "He had a flat tire," Emma said quietly. "He called to explain." "But he still missed it, didn't he?" Mr. pressed, not giving her a chance to explain further. "And doesn't that show that he doesn't prioritize you, that he puts other things first?" Emma felt tears beginning to form. I don't think that's fair. He tries really hard." "Just answer yes or no, Emma. Isn't it true that your father cares more about his girlfriend than he cares about you?" "No," Emma's voice cracked. "That's not true. He loves me." But Mr. simply smiled and continued his assault with more leading questions, each one designed to put words in Emma's mouth, to make her confirm his narrative. Emma tried to resist, tried to explain the nuance of situations that couldn't be reduced to yes or no answers, but the lawyer was relentless. Then it was Susan Williams's turn, and she did essentially the same thing from the opposite direction. She asked leading questions designed to make Emma attack her mother, to suggest that Jennifer was the one being manipulative and self-serving. When Emma tried to defend her mother or provide context, the lawyer cut her off or twisted her words. By the time both attorneys had finished their questioning, Emma felt completely devastated. She'd been interrogated, manipulated, caught in contradictions, and made to feel like a liar no matter what she said. Her voice had been stolen by legal machinery designed to use her as evidence rather than listen to her as a human being. The judge observed all of this with an expression that gave nothing away. She made notes in her leather-bound folder, her face remaining a mask of professional indifference. Emma searched the judge's face for some sign of understanding, some indication that an adult in this room saw what was really happening, that a child was being torn apart by two people who were supposed to love her unconditionally. She found nothing but coldness. When she was finally released from the stand, Emma felt like she'd been hollowed out from the inside. She'd been manipulated by both sides, forced to choose between her parents over and over, pressured to be dishonest, and ultimately rendered voiceless despite having spent hours in that courtroom. As she walked past her parents, neither one acknowledged her distress. They were too focused on their attorneys, too consumed with their own victory or defeat. Emma had never felt more alone in her entire life. The questioning continued for another 45 minutes, though to Emma it felt like hours. Her vision had started to blur around the edges. Her chest felt impossibly tight, as if someone were wrapping invisible bands around her ribs, tightening them incrementally. She couldn't catch her breath properly. Every intake felt shallow, insufficient, like she was drowning in air. When Susan Williams asked her a question about whether she felt safe with her mother, Emma opened her mouth to answer but found that no words would come. Instead, a strange sound emerged, something between a whisper and a whimper. The courtroom fell silent. Even the court reporter's fingers paused above the keyboard. Judge frowned. "Are you all right, Emma?" she asked, her tone suggesting irritation rather than concern, as if Emma's distress was an inconvenience to the proceedings. Emma tried again, but the words caught in her throat. Her hands had started to shake violently. She gripped the edge of the witness stand, her knuckles turning white. People in the courtroom began to shift uncomfortably. Her mother leaned toward her attorney and whispered something. Her father stood up as if to move toward her, but his lawyer pulled him back down. The room was spinning. Emma's breathing had become rapid and shallow, each breath feeling more panicked than the last. She recognized the symptoms. She'd experienced panic attacks before, usually late at night when the fighting got particularly bad. But never in front of an audience. Never in front of a judge who would likely interpret her emotional breakdown as weakness, as dishonesty, as proof that she was an unreliable witness. Emma's voice came out as barely a whisper. I can't breathe." Judge sighed heavily, clearly viewing this as a performance. "Do we need a recess?" she asked, her tone suggesting she found the question tedious. But before anyone could answer, the bailiff noticed Emma's increasingly panicked state and immediately called for a recess, recognizing that continuing was impossible. "Court is in recess for 30 minutes, Judge announced, striking her gavel with finality. Emma was escorted from the courtroom by a court liaison named, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and gray streaks in her dark hair, guided her to a small private room adjacent to the courtroom, a space designed for child witnesses, with softer lighting and comfortable chairs. There were some tissues on the table and a water dispenser in the corner. It was better than the courtroom, but it still felt like a cage. "Let's sit down," said gently, guiding Emma to a chair. "You're having a panic attack, sweetheart. It's okay. Just try to slow your breathing. In for 4 counts, hold for 4 counts, out for 4 counts. Can you do that with me?" Emma tried to follow instructions, but her body wasn't obeying her mind's commands. Her heart was racing so fast she was convinced she was having a heart attack. She was 9 years old, and she was sure she was dying. "I can't do this," Emma gasped between breaths. "I can't go back in there, I can't. I don't know what to say. They're trying to make me say bad things about my dad, but then I said I love him, and now my mom's probably mad and I can't choose. I can't choose between them, and I'm going to disappoint everyone no matter what I say." The words poured out in a desperate, incoherent rush. Sat beside her, not interrupting, just letting Emma get it all out. She rubbed Emma's back in slow, steady circles, offering the kind of physical comfort that neither of Emma's parents seemed capable of providing right now. "I just want Bailey," Emma sobbed. "I want my dog. Bailey understands me. Bailey doesn't ask me to choose. Bailey just loves me. That's all. That's all I need right now." Looked at this broken child and felt her heart breaking. She'd worked in family court for 12 years and had seen countless children crushed under the weight of parental conflict. But something about this particular moment struck her deeply. She recognized genuine distress that went far beyond typical courtroom anxiety. "Who's Bailey?" asked gently. "My dog," Emma whispered. "She's at my dad's house. She's a golden retriever, and she's the only one who really listens to me. She doesn't try to make me say things I don't mean. She just accepts me. Is there any way Bailey could come here? Could I see her?" Considered this request carefully. It was highly irregular. Dogs in courtrooms were unheard of, completely against protocol. She'd never seen anything like it in her entire career. But as she looked at Emma, this tiny girl whose body was still trembling, whose eyes were filled with desperate hope, she felt something inside her shift. "That's an unusual request," said carefully. "I'm not sure if it's even possible, but let me talk to the judge. Sometimes judges can be flexible if there's a compelling reason." Emma looked up, a flicker of hope crossing her devastated face. "Really? You'd do that? You'd ask?" "I can try," said, "but I can't promise anything. You understand that, right?" Emma nodded, but her body was already releasing some of its tension. Just the possibility, the mere chance that Bailey might come, seemed to stabilize her somehow. It was as if the universe had heard her plea and was offering a lifeline, even if that lifeline was thin and uncertain. Stepped out of the room for a moment to call the bailiff. Emma sat alone, trying to regulate her breathing, focusing on the image of Bailey's warm eyes and soft fur. She thought about all those training sessions in the garage, all those times Bailey had placed her paw on Emma's chest and looked at her with that profound, unconditional acceptance. Bailey didn't have an agenda. Bailey didn't want Emma to choose sides. Bailey just wanted to be present with her, to support her, to validate her. When returned, her expression was complicated, not quite a yes but not a no either. The judge said it's unusual, but she's willing to consider it. She wants to speak with you about why you think having your dog present would help. But Emma, I need you to understand something. This is very irregular. The judge might say no. Are you prepared for that possibility? Emma's heart sank a little, but she nodded. She'd learned through countless disappointments to never get her hopes too high. But she also knew something that no adult in this courtroom seemed to understand. Bailey wasn't just a pet. Bailey was her truth-teller, her evidence that genuine love and understanding still existed in a world that had become nothing but manipulation and pain. I have to try, Emma said quietly. Because if I have to go back in there without Bailey, without something to help me tell the truth, I don't think I can do it. I think I'll just break completely. Looked at this small girl with profound sadness and something close to determination. She'd spent 12 years working within a system that often failed the very people it was supposed to protect. But in this moment, looking at Emma's desperate hope, she decided that maybe, just maybe, sometimes the system needed to bend. Sometimes protocol needed to take a backseat to genuine human need. "Come on," said, standing and extending her hand. "Let's go talk to the judge together," held Emma's hand as they walked through the courthouse hallways. Emma's legs felt unsteady and her mind was racing with 1,000 questions. Would the judge say yes? Would Bailey even be allowed in the courtroom? What if her parents said no? What if the judge thought she was being ridiculous, childish, trying to manipulate the system? They approached Judge's chambers, a heavy wooden door with brass handles that looked intimidating to Emma. Knocked softly and was invited in by the judge's assistant. Judge sat behind an imposing desk made of dark mahogany, still wearing her black robes. Her gray eyes looked up from the documents she'd been reviewing, and her expression remained neutral, neither warm nor cold, just professionally detached. "Emma," the judge said formally, "tells me you'd like to make an unusual request. Please explain to me what you need." Emma's throat felt dry. She was standing in front of a woman with the power to determine her entire future, and she had to convince this woman to do something completely against protocol. She took a deep breath, remembering all those times in the garage when Bailey had placed her paw on Emma's chest, encouraging her to be brave. "Your Honor," Emma began, her voice still shaky but growing stronger, "I have a dog named Bailey. She's a golden retriever and she helps me. When I'm scared or when I'm trying to tell the truth, Bailey understands me in a way nobody else does. I trained her to respond to me, to recognize when I'm being honest. And I think if Bailey was with me in the courtroom, I could answer the questions better. I could be braver. I could tell the real truth, instead of just saying what people want me to say." Judge's expression didn't change. She set down her pen carefully and steepled her fingers beneath her chin. "Emma, I appreciate your honesty about your fear, but you understand that having a dog in the courtroom is highly irregular. It would be a violation of standard courtroom procedure. I know, Emma said quietly, but I'm breaking apart in there. When they asked me questions, I felt like I was being torn into pieces. I don't know what to say, and every answer makes someone angry. Bailey doesn't do that. Bailey just understands me. Judge was quiet for a long moment. She'd spent 3 decades in family law, had presided over hundreds of custody cases, and had learned to maintain emotional distance from the human dramas unfolding before her. But there was something about this particular child's plea that penetrated her professional armor. She saw something in Emma that she hadn't fully registered from the bench: genuine desperation, authentic need, not manipulation, but a genuine cry for help. "Where is this dog currently?" the judge asked. "At my father's apartment," Emma said. "With a dog sitter. She's probably wondering where I am." Judge stood and walked to her chamber window, looking out at the Portland rain falling steadily. When she turned back, her decision seemed to have already been made. "This is highly irregular. It violates every protocol we have. However," she paused, choosing her words carefully, "I've been practicing law for 30 years, and I've learned that sometimes protocol exists to serve the system, but the system should ultimately serve justice and human welfare. If you believe this animal will help you be more truthful and less distressed, then I'm willing to make an exception. But there are conditions." Emma's heart leaped. "Okay, anything." "The dog will be examined by a court-appointed handler to ensure it's trained, calm, and non-threatening. It will remain on a leash at all times. It will remain near you at all times. If the dog becomes disruptive in any way, it will be removed immediately. Is that clear?" "Yes, Your Honor. Thank you so much." Was visibly surprised by the judge's decision. As they left the chambers, she immediately began making phone calls to arrange for a bailiff to retrieve Bailey from David's apartment, and to have a dog handler available to assess the animal before bringing it into the courtroom. When Judge returned to the bench and announced, "We will reconvene in 20 minutes. Before we do, there's a matter I need to address with both counsel," the courtroom erupted in confusion. Richard, Emma's mother's attorney, was the first to object. "Your Honor, with all due respect, I don't understand what this matter could be." "You will," the judge said coldly. Counsel approached the bench. What followed was a heated discussion that the court reporter recorded, but that was largely inaudible to the observers in the courtroom. Richard and Susan both looked shocked, then outraged. They raised objections, cited precedent, argued that this was inappropriate, that it would prejudice the court, that it was an attempt by the other side to manipulate the proceedings. But Judge shut them down with remarkable finality. "I am aware that this is unusual. However, it is within my judicial discretion to make accommodations for a distressed child witness. This accommodation is being made on my authority and at my discretion. If either of you wishes to appeal this decision, you are welcome to do so after the hearing concludes. But right now, the witness will have access to whatever support system she believes will help her testify truthfully. That is my final ruling." Both attorneys retreated to their tables, fuming. Emma's mother looked angry, as if her daughter had just betrayed her. Emma's father looked confused but hopeful. Neither of them seemed to understand that the judge had just made a decision based not on which parent was right, but on what was best for Emma's, something neither parent had seemed capable of prioritizing. 15 minutes later, a bailiff appeared in the courtroom with Bailey on a leash. The golden retriever walked calmly beside the uniformed officer, her tail down, her demeanor serious and composed. A dog handler had already assessed her in a private room and confirmed that Bailey was well-trained, calm, and responsive to commands. When Bailey's eyes found Emma, something shifted in the room's energy. The dog's tail began to move slowly, and there was visible recognition in the dog's expression. The handler guided Bailey to the witness stand area where Emma was waiting. Emma's eyes filled with tears as she saw her beloved companion. "You may pet your dog," Judge said, her voice carrying a note of something that almost sounded like compassion. "But you will both need to be ready to continue with the testimony. Are we clear?" "Yes, Your Honor," Emma whispered, her hands already burying themselves in Bailey's warm, soft fur. As Emma held Bailey close, something fundamental changed inside her. The panic that had been consuming her only 30 minutes earlier began to recede. She could feel her heartbeat slowing, her breathing deepening. The anxiety didn't disappear entirely, but it became manageable, transformed from a tidal wave into something she could swim through. Bailey settled calmly beside Emma's feet, her presence solid and real and absolutely present. The dog seemed to understand the gravity of the situation, seemed to sense that Emma needed her more than ever before. Judge picked up her gavel. "We are back in session. Emma, I have more questions for you. And this time I want to hear your truth, not what either of your parents wants you to say, not what the lawyers want to hear. Your truth. Do you understand?" Emma looked down at Bailey, felt the dog's reassuring presence, and nodded. For the first time all day, she felt like she might actually be able to do this. For the first time, she felt like someone, an actual authority figure, was asking her to be honest rather than asking her to serve someone else's agenda. The stage was set. Everything was about to change. Judge settled back into her chair, her black robe seeming to settle around her like authority itself. The courtroom had gone completely silent. Even the usual ambient sounds, the shuffling of papers, the whispered conversations between attorneys, the distant hum of fluorescent lights, seemed to fade into nothing. All attention was focused on Emma and Bailey. "Emma," the judge began, her voice deliberately gentle, completely different from the cold formality that had characterized the earlier proceedings. "I want you to forget about the lawyers for a moment. Forget about me sitting here on this bench. Forget about your parents sitting in this courtroom. I want you to imagine that you're talking only to Bailey. Tell her about your life. Tell her the truth about what it's been like for you these past 3 years. Tell her what you really feel about your mother, your father, and this whole situation. Can you do that?" Emma felt her chest tighten with emotion. She stroked Bailey's soft ears and took a deep, shaking breath. For weeks, she'd been holding everything inside: the anger, the confusion, the sadness, the guilt, the fear. She'd been fragmenting herself into different versions depending on who she was with, saying different things to different people, never allowing her true self to emerge. But now, with Bailey's warmth solid against her leg, with the dog's dark eyes fixed on her with complete, undivided attention, Emma felt something cracking open inside her. "I love my mom," Emma began, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I'm scared of her sometimes. She's so angry all the time. She asks me questions about my dad, and I know she wants me to say bad things about him. And I feel guilty because I love my dad, and I feel like I'm betraying her by saying that. So I try to say things that won't make her mad, but I end up lying, and that makes me feel terrible." Tears were streaming down Emma's face now. She made the hand signal she'd taught Bailey, the one they'd practiced hundreds of times in the garage, the gesture that meant, "I'm telling the truth." It was a subtle motion, her hand touching her heart and then extending outward with her palm open. Bailey's response was immediate and profound. The golden retriever's ears perked up. Without any command, without any prompting, Bailey slowly stood and placed one paw directly on Emma's chest, directly over her heart. The dog's head tilted slightly, and her brown eyes locked onto Emma's with an intensity that seemed to transcend the normal dog-human relationship. The entire courtroom gasped. Several people actually stood up in their seats, including Emma's father. The court reporter's fingers froze over the keyboard. Even the judge leaned forward, her previously impassive face showing visible surprise. Emma continued speaking, her voice growing stronger now that Bailey had validated her. "And I love my dad too, but he does the same thing. He asks me questions about my mom, and he wants me to say bad things about her. And I feel guilty because I love my mom, and I don't think all the things he says about her are true. He promises me things that he doesn't always remember to do, and sometimes I think he's more interested in his new girlfriend than in spending time with me. But he does love me. I know he does." She made the truth signal again, and Bailey's response was even more pronounced. The dog pressed her body against Emma's leg while keeping her paw on the girl's chest, creating a physical manifestation of emotional support and validation. It was as if Bailey was saying, "I see you. I hear you. Your truth matters." Emma's mother's attorney looked like he was about to object, but Judge held up her hand sharply, silencing him before he could speak. Her expression had transformed completely. She was witnessing something she'd never seen before in all her years on the bench. A child actually speaking her unfiltered truth, and an animal appearing to validate that truth in real time. "Continue," the judge said quietly. "The worst part," Emma said, her voice shaking with emotion, "is that I feel like I have to choose, like I have to pick a winner and a loser. And no matter what I say, someone I love is going to be hurt. And I hate that. I hate this. I hate feeling like I'm the reason my family is broken. I hate feeling like a chess piece. I hate that nobody has asked me what I actually need. Nobody has asked if maybe I could live with both of them. Nobody has asked if maybe the fighting could stop." She made the truth signal a third time, and Bailey's response was heartbreaking in its perfection. The dog tilted her head in that way she'd learned, the gesture that said, "I understand," and she gently licked one of Emma's tears away. The action was so tender, so clearly a response to Emma's emotional pain, that even the court's stern bailiff looked visibly moved. "I need my parents to stop fighting," Emma continued, the words pouring out now like they'd been up for years and had finally found release. "I need them to understand that I love them both, and I need them to love me more than they hate each other. And I need something that helps me feel safe, something that helps me know that I'm not crazy for feeling confused, something that helps me know that my truth actually matters. And that's Bailey. Bailey is that thing for me." She made the truth signal one final time, and Bailey performed it perfectly. The synchronized movement between girl and dog so seamless, so genuine, so impossible to dismiss as mere training or coincidence. The dog placed her paw on Emma's heart and held it there, completely still, completely present, her eyes never leaving Emma's face. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the sounds of the rain outside seemed to stop. It was as if the entire universe had paused to acknowledge what had just happened. A child had been heard. A child had been believed. A child had communicated her truth in a way that transcended words, transcended manipulation, transcended the entire adversarial legal system. Judge was visibly affected. Her jaw was tight, and her eyes had taken on a glassy quality that suggested she was fighting back tears. She turned away for a moment, ostensibly to make notes, but really to compose herself. In 30 years of practicing law, she had never experienced anything like this moment. Emma's father had his hand over his mouth. Tears were streaming down his face. He looked at his daughter with an expression of such profound realization and guilt that it seemed to physically age him. Emma's mother looked furious, betrayed, her face flushed red. But beneath the anger there was something else, a crack in her facade, a recognition that she'd been wrong, that her mission to turn Emma against her father had backfired completely, that her daughter had actually been begging for something else entirely. Richard, Emma's mother's attorney, looked completely undone. His carefully constructed case suddenly felt hollow and manipulative in comparison to what had just been witnessed. Susan Williams, Emma's father's attorney, had her hands clasped in front of her, and there were tears in her eyes. She seemed to have the first genuine human reaction to the proceedings, not triumph, not victory, but genuine sympathy for what Emma had endured. Judge slowly turned back to face the courtroom. Her expression was no longer cold or detached. She looked like someone who had just had a profound moral awakening, someone who had just witnessed the failure of her entire system and had decided that something had to change. "This court will take a recess," she announced, her voice carrying new authority and new purpose. "I need to speak with the child psychologist who is in the courtroom. We will reconvene in 1 hour." As the bailiff began clearing the courtroom, Emma sat with her arms around Bailey, the dog's head resting against her shoulder. For the first time in months, Emma didn't feel alone. She didn't feel unheard. She didn't feel like her truth didn't matter. She felt for the first time like someone, finally, had actually listened to her. Judge sat in her private chambers with Dr. Helen Santos, the child psychologist who had been observing the proceeding. The judge had removed her robes and was standing by her window, looking out at the Portland skyline obscured by rain. She looked like she'd aged 10 years in the past 30 minutes. "Tell me what I just witnessed," Judge said without preamble. It wasn't a request. It was a command from someone seeking clarity on something that had shaken her to her core. Dr. Santos, a woman in her early 60s with decades of experience working with traumatized children, took a moment before responding. She was still processing what she'd seen as well. "Your Honor, what you witnessed was a child finally feeling safe enough to speak her authentic truth. The dog wasn't performing a trick, or rather it was, but not in the way most people would think." Emma trained Bailey to respond to a specific signal that Emma herself uses to ground herself when she's telling the truth. What we saw in that courtroom was Emma, through that signal and the dog's response, creating what psychologists call a somatic anchor, a physical, embodied way of saying, "This is real, this is true, this is me." Judge turned from the window, and the dog's responses, were those genuinely appropriate, or was that Emma somehow cueing the animal? "Both," Dr. Santos said. "Emma did train Bailey to respond to specific signals, but the profundity of the dog's responses, the way the animal seemed to understand Emma's emotional state, the way Bailey kept her presence steady and calm when Emma was spiraling, that's not just training. That's genuine emotional attunement between a child and an animal. Golden retrievers are highly empathetic animals. Bailey wasn't just performing. Bailey was genuinely responding to Emma's emotional authenticity. That dog knew her girl was speaking truth. Judge sat down heavily in her chair. In my 30 years on this bench, I have never, not once, had a case where both parents loved their child but were so consumed with hating each other that they completely missed what their child actually needed. And I certainly have never had a case where the child had to create her own validation system just to be heard. It's more common than you might think, Dr. Santos said gently. Children in high-conflict custody situations often develop sophisticated coping mechanisms. Some become perfect people pleasers. Some become withdrawn and depressed. Some, like Emma, become incredibly creative in finding ways to communicate their truth when the normal channels for communication are being weaponized against them. The judge stood and began packing, her mind clearly working through something significant. What does Emma actually need? Not what either parent is claiming she needs, but what does this child genuinely need to thrive? Dr. Santos chose her words carefully. Emma needs 3 things. First, she needs both her parents actively present in her life, but she needs them to stop fighting in ways that force her to choose between them. Second, she needs professional support, family therapy at minimum, possibly individual therapy for herself to process the trauma she's experienced. Third, and most importantly, she needs to know that her truth matters more than either parent's need to win this custody battle. Right now, Emma has internalized the message that she's responsible for keeping both her parents happy by saying what they want to hear. That's a profound psychological burden for a 9-year-old to carry. Judge stopped packing. And the dog? Is the dog simply a crutch, or is there genuine therapeutic value? Both, Dr. Santos said. In the short term, Bailey is helping Emma access her truth in a way that feels safe. But more importantly, Bailey represents unconditional love and acceptance in Emma's life right now. When both parents are demanding, manipulating, and using her as leverage, Bailey offers something radically different. A presence that asks nothing of her except to exist. That's not nothing, Your Honor. That's everything to a traumatized child. Judge sat back down and was quiet for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a weight of responsibility and realization. I have spent my career believing that the law could solve custody disputes. I've believed that if we just follow the procedures, if we just ask the right questions and listen carefully to the answers, we can determine what's in the child's best interest. But what I witnessed in that courtroom today was not a legal proceeding that served a child's interests. What I witnessed was a child being systematically failed by every adult in the system, designed to protect her. She stood again and walked to her desk, pulling out a legal pad. I'm going to suspend this hearing. I'm going to order a comprehensive psychological evaluation of Emma, conducted by an independent evaluator, someone neither parent has access to, someone who can speak with Emma in a way that the courtroom cannot. I'm going to order mandatory family therapy for both parents and for Emma. And I'm going to do something I've never done before in my career. I'm going to make a preliminary ruling that designates Bailey as an officially recognized emotional support animal in this custody case, which means that regardless of where Emma lives, Bailey will remain her constant, and both parents will be legally required to facilitate the dog's presence in Emma's life. Dr. Santos looked visibly impressed. That's a significant step, Your Honor. It's the right step, Judge said firmly. I've been so focused on determining which parent should have custody that I've completely missed the fundamental question. What does this child actually need to heal? And the answer isn't a judge's ruling. The answer is both parents prioritizing her over their own conflict, professional support, and yes, apparently, a dog that understands her better than the adults in her life do. She stood and began reviewing files on her desk. I want you to conduct the independent evaluation of Emma. I want you to work with a family therapist to determine what therapeutic interventions would be most beneficial. And I want you to document all of this, not in the sterile language of psychological reports, but in a way that makes it absolutely clear to any future judge or reviewer why Emma needs what she needs. I'll do that, Dr. Santos said. But Your Honor, I think there's something else you should consider. What's that? Emma's parents need to see what their daughter just experienced in that courtroom. They need to understand what their conflict is doing to her, not as a punishment or a condemnation, but as an awakening. Sometimes parents don't realize the damage they're causing until they actually see it reflected back to them. Judge nodded slowly. You're right. When I reconvene this hearing, I'm going to show both parents the video recording of Emma's testimony. I want them to see exactly what they've created through their battle. I want them to see the moment their daughter finally spoke her truth, and how that truth involved them realizing that their conflict matters less than her. She moved toward the door, then paused. And Emma, what should I tell her? Tell her that you heard her, Dr. Santos said simply. Tell her that her truth matters. Tell her that Bailey was right, that she was telling the truth, and tell her that the adults are going to do better. Tell her that this is no longer about choosing between her parents, but about both her parents learning to put her first. Tell her that she doesn't have to be the one fixing this anymore. Judge took a deep breath and nodded. She felt the weight of her position differently now, not as a neutral arbiter applying law to facts, but as a guardian of a child's fundamental right to be heard and protected. She'd been practicing law for 30 years, but she'd never felt more like she was actually serving justice than in this moment. She walked back out into the hallway where Emma was sitting with Bailey, the dog's head in the girl's lap, both of them looking exhausted but peaceful. Judge sat down beside them, an action so informal it would have shocked anyone who knew her professional demeanor. Emma, she said gently, I want you to know that I heard you. Your truth matters. Bailey was right about you, and I'm going to make sure that the adults in your life finally start listening the way that dog does." Emma looked up, her eyes filled with cautious hope. "Does that mean I'm not going to have to choose?" "It means," Judge said, "that I'm going to suspend this hearing and we're going to do things differently. We're going to focus on what you need, not on what your parents want. And Bailey is going to be a part of that. I promise you that." For the first time that day, Emma's face showed genuine relief. 3 months later, Emma sat in Judge's chambers once again, but this time the atmosphere was completely different. There was warmth here now, and genuine connection. The judge had taken off her robes and was sitting beside Emma like a real person, not an imposing figure of authority. Bailey was curled up at Emma's feet, her presence calm and reassuring. "I want you to know," Judge said, "that the decision I made in your case has already started having ripple effects throughout the family law system. Other judges are asking questions about how we can better serve children in custody disputes. Your courage in speaking your truth changed things, Emma. Not just for you, but potentially for many other children." Emma felt a warmth spread through her chest. She'd spent so long feeling like a failure, like she'd done something wrong by existing in the middle of her parents' conflict. Now, finally, she understood that her voice had value. Her perspective mattered. 3 months of intensive family therapy had transformed Emma's household situation. The preliminary ruling had mandated that both her mother, Jennifer, and her father, David, attend mandatory co-parenting counseling with a court-appointed family therapist. What had started as a legal requirement had gradually transformed into something deeper, a genuine commitment from both parents to change their behavior. It hadn't been easy. There had been moments when both parents wanted to revert to their old patterns, moments when the anger threatened to resurface. But every time they felt that pull, they thought about that moment in the courtroom when their daughter had finally spoken the truth that neither of them wanted to hear, that they loved her more than they hated each other, but barely. That realization had been like cold water thrown in their faces. David had been the first to break through his own defensiveness. In his individual therapy sessions, he'd admitted that he'd been using Emma to soothe his own insecurities about his failed marriage and to prove to himself that his ex-wife was wrong about him. He'd been so focused on winning that he'd completely missed the fact that his daughter was suffering. That realization had devastated him, but it had also liberated him. He'd apologized to Emma, genuinely, without conditions, without trying to get her to apologize back or defend him. Jennifer had taken longer to get there, but she'd eventually admitted that her coaching of Emma had been emotionally abusive, regardless of her intention to protect her daughter. She'd realized that her own pain and betrayal from the divorce had made her incapable of putting Emma's needs first. She too had apologized to her daughter and had committed to a year of individual therapy to process her own trauma and learn healthier ways of relating to her child. The new custody arrangement that Judge had implemented was revolutionary in its focus on Emma's, rather than on equal time splitting. Instead of every other week custody, Emma now spent Monday through Friday with her mother and Thursday through Sunday with her father, with flexibility built in for special occasions and school events. But more importantly, both parents had agreed to never the other parent in front of Emma, to present a united front on major decisions, and to prioritize Emma's emotional health above their own need to win custody. And Bailey had become officially recognized as an emotional support animal by the court, with specific language in the custody agreement stating that Bailey would remain Emma's constant regardless of which parent's house she was in. Both parents had signed legal documents committing to facilitating the dog's transition between households, and understanding that Bailey was essential to Emma's emotional. The most surprising development had been that David and Jennifer had actually started communicating in a civil manner. They would exchange information about Emma's school progress, her emotional state, and her needs. They attended her school conferences together. They'd even jointly taken a parenting class focused on helping children cope with divorce and custody situations. "How are you doing?" Judge asked Emma gently. "Really doing, I mean. Not the surface answer, but how are you actually feeling?" Emma considered the question carefully. "I feel lighter," she finally said. "Like I can breathe now. I don't wake up with that knot in my stomach anymore. I don't feel like I have to perform or say what people want me to say. I can just be myself." "That's what you deserve," Judge said. "Every child deserves that." Emma looked down at Bailey and made the truth signal, the gesture she'd created weeks ago that had changed everything. Bailey's response was automatic, a slight tilt of her head, a soft focus of her eyes on Emma, a grounding presence. But this time, Emma made the signal not to communicate truth to others but to affirm truth to herself, to acknowledge that she was okay now, that the worst was over. The case had garnered significant attention in legal circles. Judge had published a detailed opinion about the ruling, specifically addressing how the family law system often fails to genuinely listen to children. She'd written extensively about the concept of emotional support animals in custody disputes, arguing that when a child has developed a genuine therapeutic bond with an animal, that bond should be protected by law. Several law schools had begun using the case as a teaching example. Family law professors across the country were now discussing Judge's decision and its implications. The opinion had been cited in other cases where emotional support animals were involved in custody disputes. But beyond the legal significance, there was a deeper human impact. Emma had received letters from other children in custody situations who'd read about her case and felt less alone. Teachers and school counselors were now asking about children's attachment to emotional support animals as part of their assessment of children's emotional health. Parents were being forced to reckon with how their custody battles were affecting their children. 1 year after the original hearing, Judge invited Emma and her parents to her chambers for a special recognition ceremony. David and Jennifer were nervous. They hadn't seen the judge since the hearing, and there was still some residual anxiety about legal proceedings. But what they encountered was something completely different. Judge presented Emma with a framed certificate recognizing her as a young agent of change in the family law system. The certificate specifically commended her for her courage in speaking her truth and for her innovation in finding her own way to communicate her authentic needs. But the moment that moved Emma most was when Judge knelt down and petted Bailey, looking the dog in the eyes and saying, "Thank you, Bailey. Thank you for being the voice that helped your girl speak. Thank you for showing an old judge that sometimes the most important work isn't following the rules, it's listening to what really matters." After the ceremony, David and Jennifer stood together, not as adversaries, but as two people who had finally learned to co-parent effectively. They watched their daughter with her dog, and they both felt something like peace. "I'm sorry," David said quietly to Jennifer. "I'm sorry for what I did to Emma, for what I did to you, for what we did to each other." Jennifer nodded. "I'm sorry too. I was so hurt and so angry that I couldn't see what I was doing to her. Thank God something broke through." "It was Bailey," David said, "and Emma's courage." The legal community's response to Judge's decision had been mixed, but ultimately positive. Some conservative judges criticized her for making accommodations outside of protocol, but the majority recognized the wisdom and compassion in her ruling. Several states began incorporating language about emotional support animals into their family law codes. Most importantly, Emma thrived. Her anxiety diminished. Her grades improved. She developed healthy friendships without the constant background noise of parental conflict. She still saw Dr. Santos, the psychologist, for individual therapy sessions, but they'd evolved from crisis management to genuine personal growth work. Bailey had become something of a celebrity in their community. Local news outlets had picked up the story and featured the girl and her dog as an example of how love and innovation could solve seemingly impossible problems. The family received interview requests, but Emma politely declined most of them. She didn't want to be a symbol or a story. She just wanted to be a normal girl with her dog and her parents, living a life that was finally marked by peace instead of war. On quiet evenings when Emma sat with Bailey in her mother's living room, she would sometimes make that truth signal, not to communicate to anyone else, but to affirm to herself the journey she'd taken. She'd gone from a voiceless child being torn apart by adult conflict to a young girl whose voice had changed an entire legal system. Not because she was exceptional or special, but because one dog loved her unconditionally, one judge listened deeply, and one child found the courage to speak the truth that everyone needed to hear. Bailey would respond to that signal every single time, a perfect, synchronized acknowledgement that Emma's truth mattered, that Emma mattered. And that was enough.